We now take you to the broadcast of It's Time with Rev Nathaniel W Martin. Here's Reverend Martin.
Thank you, Pastor Blackwell. My name is Reverend Nathaniel W Martin. I'm the pastor of the New Life Institutional Baptist Church here in Los Angeles. We're located at 8916 South Main Street in L.A., and I invite you to come by and worship with me and commune with me, and let me shake your hand. You shake my hand, and let's pray with you on life's journey. We're sharing the building worship services with the Shiloh Missionary Christian Church, my good friend, and the pastor there, Reverend Dr. Della F. Holliness. And I want to give her a shout out. Hope she's feeling better. And to the members of both congregations, we thank God for what He is demonstrating there on that block. And we have services on Sundays, of course, at 11 a.m. and then again on on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. and again on Friday night to this very night at 7 p.m. Come by and worship with us. We'll be glad to pray with you, pray for you, pray over your condition, and put you on our prayer list that God may continue to richly bless and increase your life. You're going to need God. You're going to need Jesus. Don't try to live this life without Him. Get Him in your psyche. Get Him in your subconscious. Get Him in your heart. Get Him in your life. However you may so describe your persona. Whatever discipline you may have studied under or labored under, you need Jesus in your life. That is a bona fide fact and universal truth. However, this offering that you're looking at now is entitled It's Time. And what we deal with on this broadcast is the issue of social justice. And, of course, justice for us, for U.S. blacks born in America, and the American descendants of the slaves, those people that were enslaved, as Dr. Tony Hesse-Coates has taught us to call our ancestors, though recognize that they were free people before they were enslaved. They were enslaved by someone else, and they labored in that enslaved condition. And they were not just runaway slaves, they were freedom seekers. I like that type of use of the King's English, and I encourage you to make use of it likewise as much as you may see fit. I'll start off talking about what I did yesterday, which is I went to see Just Mercy, which is a movie starring Jamie Foxx and Michael B. Jordan. Good movie. I encourage you to go check it out. About this guy, real-life prisoner named Macmillan, who was finally gotten off of death row and finally gotten out of prison. And this prison initiative that is active there in Mississippi has gotten a lot, I think it said over 140 inmates off of death row, and it brought up a very startling statistic. Out of every 9 death row inmates that are executed, one of them is innocent. That's not good. And so we need to look again at what is going on in our prison system. While we're on that subject, although it's kind of off from what we're dealing with, but yet it is germane in the long view, because we are all impacted by the carceral state as it is defined by Michelle Alexander and Professor Angela Davis and journalist Ta-Nehisi Coates and so many hundreds of others that labor in that field and have brought that to our cognizance and to our consciousness. We cannot forget our brothers and our sisters that languish in our prisons and in our jails. and in other places of confinement. We must not throw away the key. We made a horrible mistake during the PCP crack epidemic when we sided with the law and order crowd, lock them up and throw away the key. That has come back to bite us on the proverbial because of the fact that's poor policy. As Michelle Alexander said, at some point people do get out of prison and they do come back to the neighborhood, to the society, to the environment. And we must rethink and retool and not be conditioned by those who scream the cliches and about law and order. Because remember that although we as black people only make up 13% of the U.S. population, we make up over 40% of those that are incarcerated. I had those statistics in front of me, but I'm not going to look. Here we are. Look for it right this second, because I'm not going to let my little time be taken up by trying to read through a lot of hard statistics that you may not necessarily agree with. But in this report, it says, for example, while black inmates make up nearly 40% of the prison population, again, they only make up a mere 40% of the total U.S. population. And according to this report, there are over 2 million people in the United States. We are the most carceral state in the world. It puts us over there with Iraq and several other third world, what we consider third world countries. We as a country, United States of America, we put 25% of all inmates in the world, although our population is only 5%. And that is a very startling statistic. And everybody realizes that the system is broken and needs to be repaired. All right. And some of you remember when Richard Nixon started the war on drugs. Well, it wasn't a war on drugs. It was a war on black people, as John Ehrlichman is famously rumored to have said in subsequent interviews. And, of course, we cannot minimize the effect of a parent being in prison, what that effect that has upon the children, and what effect it has upon the family, and, yes, upon the church. Because I've had members of my congregation that gotten in trouble and have gone away for long prison terms. One boy went away for murder, and he used to call me all the time. I finally had to stop him because I couldn't afford to keep paying that high cost to have him calling me every night. Not because I didn't want to talk to him, but because I couldn't afford it. $3 a minute, $5 a minute. You talking 15 minutes every night, that runs up. Well, that's another way, in other words, that the carceral state separates families from their prison family members. And then, of course, they have started the business of California sending prisoners from here to Mississippi and other places. God bless you if you go to Mississippi. But that blocks, it stops, it eliminates the family visit, because you might can go from Los Angeles to Chino or to Corcoran, but you don't go, it's a big difference to go from Los Angeles all the way down to Parchman Prison, so to speak, or any of those other states that have private prison. So it amounts to what, in my mind, cruel and unusual punishment, because you separate the prisoner from the hope of contact with his family members as that prisoner is serving his or her sentence. I was talking to Reverend Blackwell just before the broadcast began about the situation that is currently occurring in the prisons in the state of Mississippi. The Mississippi Department of Correction has been laboring and battling to gain control of its prison system because of the fact that they have allowed the prisons to deteriorate, especially Parchman Prison, Wilkinson Prison, and other prisons that are maximum and at a minimum to maximum security. And it seems that the inability to hire staff has resulted in the wardens of those facilities collaborating with the prisoners, the leaders of the prisons gangs, to control the other prisoners. And you know that's a recipe for disaster. This week, 5 prison inmates in Mississippi were killed, not by the prison guards, but by other prisoners, prison gangs, either in retaliation. I think they have the vice lords and the gangster disciples in the state of Mississippi, and those two prison gangs war and fight against each other. And the Mississippi officials, of course, are trying to play down the gravity and the seriousness of the situation, but it is out of hand. And it's largely due to the historic philosophy and the historic approach to penitentiary and the penal system here in this country. And you see, I've taken myself far off from what I basically come to deal with, which is reparations. But had there been reparation, there might have been fewer people in these prisons. As a matter of fact, there would have been, because the history of the nation would have been so much more vital and so much more different. We've been on a much higher plane than we find ourselves now. I believe in reparations. I believe that we are owed reparations, not only from slavery, but from the 100 years of Jim Crow segregation and redlining in the housing, and just the general denial and exclusion of the black population of these United States of America, which were the descendants of the slaves, from participation in the early years of the growth of this nation. When you have the Federal Housing Administration started in 1934 with the express purpose to put people in houses and to underwrite the loans for those houses, and to reduce the amount that you had to come up with for a down payment in order to get those houses. And because the government wanted to make sure that the American citizens got themselves into a house, because it said a American citizen with a house is less likely to become a communist. But there was only one caveat: it had to exclude the American Negro, who had slaved in the fields and fought in the Civil War and come out of the Civil War and had fought in all of America's wars, from slavery, from being an enslaved person. We fought in World War I. We fought in World War II. But according to the compact or the deal struck with the Southern politicians, who were bound and determined that a Negro would never make the same salary as a white man, they were bound and determined to maintain their control over their state economy, and that their state's economy was tied to cheap labor, and that cheap labor came from the subjugation and the exploitation of the Negroes or the colored people, as that various iteration was at that time. Remember, if you are efficiently, that's the word I want to use, if you are efficiently prevented from buying where you got the money to buy, the Negroes who had the money to buy in so to speak, Paramount or Lakewood or Inglewood or Beverly Hills, we were denied the ability to buy there, even though those lands originally had been given, not sold, just simply given to the settlers in the 1860s. Even while Abraham Lincoln was president, they were beginning to settle the West, as they called it. Young man, go west, was the cry. And those lands were basically given. But when the Federal Housing Administration began to encourage white households to purchase houses, it discouraged and indeed blocked and prohibited and excluded black citizens from acquiring real estate in those same areas. You've heard me do this before, and I do it all the time, but I keep running into people who never have thought about, never knew what the history, American history, or U.S. history was as related to home ownership and why the housing patterns of our nation are as they are. They are there because of a historic redlining of the geographical real estate maps all across this country, in every state, in every city, in every geographical location. It was the norm. It was the standard operating procedure that you would not sell a house to a colored person or to a Negro person. And so that is why the Negro wound up in the slums of the cities and wound up in the projects of the cities and on the periphery of American society, as Martin Luther King described it in his 1963 I Have a Dream so-called speech. But let me finish. About to close out, and I haven't read no scripture. Scripture says, Deuteronomy chapter 15, beginning up at verse 12, and if thy brother and Hebrew man, and of course by extension, and if thy sister and Hebrew woman, even though the word if thy sister is not used, it says, be sold unto thee and serve thee 6 years. Then in the 7th year thou shalt let him or her go free from thee. And when thou sendest them out free from thee, thou shalt not let him or her go away empty. Thou shalt furnish them liberally out of thy flock, and out of thy floor, and out of thy winepress. Of that wherewith the Lord thy God has blessed thee, thou shalt give, not sell, give, not rent, give, not lease, give unto them. That was God's way, because God is a God of love. God is a God of a second chance. God is a God who does not favor this capitalistic system of inequality where you have winners and losers. And it seems like in this country we have historically predetermined that the losers were always going to be of a darker hue. And which brings up the problem of the social structure of a race in the world, and especially as it was exercised, utilized, and practiced here in the greatest country in the world. As Donald Trump says, make America great again. One has to struggle to find this latent greatness, this ancient greatness of which he seems to imply. Now, that spoken, that uttered, you must remember that God was not in favor of poverty or of treating poor people as we treat poor people in our country. We make them poor, and then we keep them poor. Dr. William Barber, who is going to be in town on January the 18th, going to be in Fontana. I encourage you to go out and hear him for Martin Luther King Day celebration. Talks about the fact that there are 7 different words in Scripture used to describe the poor. And he uses the word protokos, which is a Greek word meaning a person who was made poor. And that certainly fits in America. A lot of people have been made poor. A friend of mine was just telling me that her son's job, he lost his job because the company just simply closed down and moved out of Los Angeles. How you going to fight that? You see? And there's another company that's getting ready to close down, and they're going to lay off 500 workers. It's a beer manufacturer out there, a beer brewing place out there in Irvine, which is a little city to the east of Pasadena and therefore to the northeast of Los Angeles. But the point is that they employ over 500 people. And those employees that, around there, you got all of the periphery service companies, the restaurants and the like, and then the cleaners and the like. They're going to be impacted by the closing of that plant. I address your thoughts of this to make you see that these people were not poor because they did not work. They're being made poor because the company is closing the plant and moving away. So the people are protokos. They are being made poor. And you can use that old cliche about pull yourself up by your bootstraps a few more years if you want to. I have an interesting report that I have going to be dealing with by Dr. Let me get his name right. Derek Hamilton, Professor and Dr. William Sandy Darity, Professor Tricia Rose, and a whole host of Brown University professors in association and in collaboration with the schools of thought from Duke University and the like. They have developed what they call the Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity in America. One of their reports says, and I hit on it a few weeks ago, the title of the report is Umbrellas Don't Make It Rain. And it deals with the worsening disparity in America's post-recession. And it deals with some of the myths that we have been taught and which I have tried to explode here on this broadcast, although this little meager fare, of course, has got to get further and further out than what it is right now. But what they have come to the conclusion is what I've been saying all the time. Working hard is not enough when it comes to the black man. When it comes to race and wealth in America, working hard is not enough. That's one of the conclusions that they draw. And they go on to explain why it is not enough. Remember, wealth is not a paycheck. Wealth is not your income. Wealth is determined, I'm going to read it right here, a comprehensive understanding of wealth, which is the value of what you own minus what you owe. What you own minus what you owe. And it demonstrates, still reading, how vulnerability to economic calamity, like the Great Recession, which happened starting in, say, 2005 or 2007, can have vastly different consequences. Okay, differences in wealth accumulation are important to examine because wealth, whether invested in a debt-free education small business creation, housing, or retirement savings generates opportunity and improves well-being. What they mean by wealth is it allows you to make the initial purchase of an appreciating asset. And by other words, an appreciating asset is an asset that continues to accumulate wealth for you. Remember, wealth is what, for the most part, has killed off the growth. It has generated the huge wealth gap. And yes, it killed off the growth of the economic climb that black people are forced and are still forced to do. Because remember, those 250 years of slavery were wealth-building years, but it was negative wealth for the enslaved, whereas it was positive wealth for the enslavers. And whether you own slaves or trafficked in slaves, you were the beneficiary of the slaveocracy, because the goods and the services and the opportunities that were presented because of the fact that you did not have to go out and physically work and labor in some cotton field does not exempt you from the benefits that accrued. The professors and the teachers that taught at Georgetown and Harvard and Princeton and the like of those great Ivy League colleges, they were all the beneficiaries of slavery. Indirectly, yes, many times directly, because Harvard was an institution that was built because of slavery. The slave plantation owners sent their children to these Ivy League schools to be educated. And so the report talks about the fact that education is not the great equalizer when it comes to race and wealth. Because your child is sitting in school and you've allowed them to get to college, but you're working on a job. You stop working, they're going to have to get out of school. So you don't have wealth, you have income, you have a chance. The report is very, very indicting. It's very, very illustrative. And we're going to be delving deeper into the findings of these various reports. I've hit on mass incarceration. I'm now dealing back with the wealth gap. I'm still promoting reparations. But as this report points out, just working hard is not enough. Just working hard is not enough. It is not the great equalizer in the game of race and wealth. Because why? The deck has been stacked against you. One of the things that they found out was that a black person, U.S. black person with a college degree, has a less of an opportunity to get a chance of a good job than a white person who dropped out of high school. Now, that's something to think about. Working hard is not enough. If working hard was all it took to make it, every slave coming out of slavery would have been a multi-millionaire. At least it's been a millionaire when they come out of slavery, but they are not. If working hard was all it took, and every housewife would be rich. I'm telling you. And so as we wrap up our program for this day, I have to tell you again, draw your attention to the puzzling fact that in this country, they want to work you like a slave. They don't want you to have holidays off. If you work on the holidays, they don't want to pay you overtime. They want to give you comp time. And it leads to one conclusion. If the CEOs are making $29 million, but they only paying you kibbles and bits, they don't want to pay you. What I say again, get your own business, Get you a sideline, get you something going to bring in wealth for you, because if they don't want to pay you, believe me, don't work for them. Thank you, Doc.